Hey guys, what is up? Super K-Man Rocks here, and I am here for my LEC group stage, week number 2 overview and analysis video. Really excited to get into this one. There are a lot of good games to talk about. Only 4 series gonna be covered in here, the final week of that group stage. It's kind of weirdly timed. I've been talking about this with the LEC all year long. I really hate how they've paced the back half of these splits, how they pace the end of group stage going into playoffs. I don't think it makes any sense to do the winner's bracket in playoffs basically the day after group stage ends and then go on this big hiatus for the rest of the playoffs, like a week break. I really hate how that ends up working out, but of course, as I'm recording this, we're getting winners finals in the actual playoffs at the moment, so I'm going to try to get this video out as quickly as possible so that I can preview it at least a little bit before watching those games. But in this one, we're only going to be covering the 4 series from the group stage. By the end of this video, we are going to know the final teams that are going to be making top 4 and the teams that aren't going to be making top 4, the 4 teams that will be officially eliminated from the summer split. We're going to get a much better idea of what teams have the opportunity to qualify for the season finale towards the back half of this split, but there are so many different possibilities, especially with certain outcomes, that we're certainly not going to know the exact order of everything going into the end of this split. Just going to get a good idea of what form these teams are in. So if you're excited, let me know down in the comments section below. Who did you want to see come out of these groups? Of course, we've already seen both G2 and Excel qualify for the playoffs by winning their respective groups, but we're going to be seeing the 2 teams that are going to follow them and join them as the number 3 and the number 4 seed heading into the playoffs. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and go over it. If you are new here, what we do is we go series by series talking about the advantages and the disadvantages that each team was able to generate. I will be giving a player of the series and a dud of the series for every single series, all 4 of them that we're going to cover in this video. And then at the end of the video, we're going to cover some of the playoff matchups, and I'll give my predictions and some analysis on what I think is going to happen in that stage. It's going to be a little bit less than maybe you would expect because, again, the schedule sucks and the games are already happening. And so, I don't want to give predictions on a series that I already know some of the outcomes for, but definitely going to give my thoughts and opinions on the form that some of these teams are in going into that section. So without further ado, let's jump into it. I'm going to do the same kind of format that I did in the week 1 video and that I've done all year long, which is go group by group instead of going in the order the games happened. I will be going over everything that happened in Group B and then everything that happened in Group A, and so I know that that's kind of different in terms of the days, but I think it's a little bit easier to keep track of the consequences of those games when we stay within the groups. With only 4 series, it's really not all that big of a deal. It's just the 2 games back-to-back in both groups, and that means we get to kick it off with Group B because they were first, even though that's a little bit counterproductive, but we get to kick it off with Group B, and the losers bracket version of Group B, the 2 teams that ended up losing in that first round, we get in this first matchup, and we're going to see the first team technically eliminated from group stage here as we had a matchup between the number 2 seeded Fnatic and the number 7 seeded Mad Lions that Fnatic is going to be able to take. Mad Lions is going to be knocked out of the group stage. They are the first team officially eliminated from the group stage, and we'll get to that in a second. This team has just not been able to win a game to save their life. They are, 0-9 in their last 9 games? Not particularly good for this Mad Lions team. Really not what you were looking for, but Fnatic luckily getting the job done after pretty surprisingly falling to SK Gaming in the first round of the group stage, being able to rebound and bounce back and, get an opportunity to redeem themselves later on in this week, I think is a really, really good thing for them, and a lot of these players really stepped up. 2 in particular that I think were big standouts were my player of the series in Humanoid in the mid lane, who just was fantastic on this Jace pick. We've talked a lot about how there are a couple of really strong picks in the current meta. I think, in a lot of other regions, we're seeing Tristana, we're seeing, Kai'Sa be really highly prioritized. I think Jace definitely falls into that category as well. One of the picks that I think really is just better than basically everything else at this level at the current moment, and man, Humanoid is just proving that. Niski actually had a relatively good series on the other side of the map. He was the one dealing a lot of the damage for Mad Lions. He was staying active on the map and trying to be a proactive, carry for this team, but Humanoid stepping up in best of 3s and best of 5s, it's a pretty predictable formula at this point. He's really, really inconsistent in the regular season at times, and, even last week, I've claimed him to be a little bit of a hindrance for this team, and, to be the one that I think holds back some of their potential. And while I don't necessarily completely think that a series like this throws that out, it has been shown that Humanoid gets better as the games get more important. Maybe he locks in a little bit more mentally. I'm pretty confident that that ends up being the case, but, it's it's just the inconsistency that keep me from calling him one of the best mid laners in the LEC. But when he has really good performances like this, it's really hard to not see the upside and why people are calling him that, because he dominated this series, especially that game number 2. Had like 17 kills in game number 2. Just an utterly great performance. I did, kind of go back and forth on whether or not I should give him player of the series, not because he wasn't great, but because his teammate was spectacular, and his teammate being Trimby in the support position, who just was phenomenal this entire series. Great Braum game in game 1, but that Thresh in game number 2 is really what set up a lot of the plays that Fnatic wanted to make, and, I think Trimby really has been a big difference maker for this team in terms of the macro and just the ability to go out and consistently make a lot of these plays, and I know a lot of people are pointing to him as a big, positive for the team, but he absolutely has been. The reputation is very well earned. He's been very, very good. So Humanoid, Trimby, definitely the two standout members, but everybody performed well. Razork had a good series, was definitely the better jungler on 2 games of Maokai. Oscar played 2 good games of Ornn. All he needed to do was really be this team fight engager and, kind of a peel-oriented top laner for the Jace and for the Xayah or the Jinx or, whatever, right? Just give those players the opportunity to take over the game, and I think Oscar actually did a very good job of that, and Noah was arguably the least important member of Fnatic, which I think is a good thing, because there have been times where they've, kind of rested their entire game plan on making sure that he gets ahead. So to see them be able to win pretty consistently without the help of Noah, I think is great. Humanoid had a phenomenal series, and if he's going to play like this throughout the rest of the playoffs, like, Fnatic is going to be a top 2 team, because I really do think he is the one player that, if you unlock him, if you put him in a position where he feels comfortable, and if you can give him resources where he can just, win and take over games, Fnatic can be the best team in the LEC. That really is kind of the turning point for me. So, really good showing here for Fnatic. Great showing from Trimby as well. Really deserving player of the series, but both of them definitely deserved it. Just a really good series from the team overall. And then for Mad, obviously Summer Split didn't really matter for them, if we're being entirely honest. Depending on how the rest of this week goes, it might be completely irrelevant what ended up happening to them in this series. They might qualify as the number 2 seed in the season finale anyways, but they've been qualified for that tournament, so they could have gotten 10th this split and still qualified and still been in the exact same spot. The problem is that momentum is certainly not on their side at the current moment. 0-9 in their last 9 games, which is really not what you want to see for a team that, for all intents and purposes, should be a favorite to qualify for Worlds after finishing 2nd and 1st in the previous 2 splits. Dud of the series for me was a pretty difficult decision, because just like for Fnatic, there were 2 really good players on Fnatic that deserved player of the series. There were 2 really bad players on Mab that pretty much deserved dud of the series. I'm going to give it to Hylissang in the support position. Really felt like he was very lackluster in this series. A lot of the engages on Rel in particular were just bad engages. And, this champ, I think a lot of people are pointing to as kind of a free version of engage, something that can be very consistent for basically anybody who plays it. But Hylissang shows that that's not necessarily always the case. A pretty poor performance from him in this one. El Yoyo was the other player that I think you could definitely point at, just kind of being outclassed. That Vi game in game 2 was really bad, but that Rel game in game 1 was also not very good. Just a lot of the engages coming out from the side of Mad Lions were very ill-timed and not followed up on well. I think Niski did actually play relatively well. I think Chasey was dealing a lot of damage on a very strong Rumble pick in the meta right now, but it just wasn't going to be enough when Fnatic in general was playing well. It felt like Mad Lions' weaknesses were bigger than what Fnatic's weaknesses were in this series, and neither of the games were really all that back and forth because of it. Game 2 definitely had some moments where Niski and Chasey were strong and tried to be able to carry the game. Carzzy as well on that Samira was dealing some damage, but like I said, if your weak links are just bigger, if your weaknesses are a little bit more exploitable, it's going to be hard to win a game against a good team like Fnatic, and that was unfortunately the case for Mad. They've got to get their shit into gear. Right now, they do not look like a team that should even remotely be contending for Worlds. Obviously, we've seen this team struggle throughout this year up until this point before, and they've been able to figure it out, but this was a really bad summer split for them in terms of confidence and momentum. They're going to have to take this time off that they now have and get themselves back into the groove where they can go into that season finale and, get back to the place that they were at just a couple of months ago, because if they can't, they're probably going to be the worst team in that tournament. And then for Fnatic on the other side, this is a good performance. You wanted to see this in round number 1. It was frustrating that you weren't getting this performance against SK, but they're going to have their chance at redemption, and we're going to get into that series right now. And now we get to move on to our second of the Group B series, and this one is just as important. We're going to see which team is going to be the one to officially qualify for the top 4 with Mad Lions eliminated. It's a rematch of what we saw in round 1. Will the result be the same, or will Fnatic get some revenge as we have SK Gaming taking on Fnatic And Fnatic is going to be able to justify and rectify their first round loss by taking the series 2-0 here. SK surprised them, I think. Fnatic probably wasn't taking them as seriously as they needed to. They got some underperformances from some pretty important players on the roster, and this time, not so much. The better team did end up prevailing. Sorry, SK fans, but the more talented team, I think, ended up prevailing in this one as Fnatic really did take this series relatively well, I would say. Game 2 was insane. I mean, a complete fiesta, back and forth, both teams just trying their best to throw the game, but SK definitely threw it a little bit harder. Really, really fun series overall. I would recommend you go watch Game 2. Maybe not if you're looking for the most clinical League of Legends, but if you want a game that is just balls to the wall action and a lot of fun, I think Game 2 is definitely that. But congratulations to Fnatic with this win. They are officially moving in to the playoff stage for the first time in 2023. That's huge for them because with a loss here, they would have been eliminated from 2023, and it would have been a pretty disastrous situation for them, having been so good in the regular season in summer. If they, if their season were to end here to SK Gaming, I think that they would see that as a pretty big disappointment. But nope, they're going to be moving on, and they're going to put themselves at the very least in a position to play their way into that tournament. Nothing is guaranteed up until this point, but this is a very important and necessary step to get to that direction. Good series overall for Fnatic. Player of the series for me is going to go to Razork in the jungle. I think you could make a case he's been the most important player on this team. Noah and Trimby are definitely in that conversation as well. I think it's either Razork or Noah, in my opinion, towards what this team has been able to do. Trimby's also in the conversation. I shouldn't just completely discount him like that. I feel like that is pretty disrespectful to what he's been able to do, but Razork's been awesome for this team this split. It's been a really big turnaround for him, and I think his consistency or his increasing consistency has been a big reason why Fnatic has been able to win so many games over the course of this split up until this point. Being able to pull out the Rel and be so good in game number 1 and be really good on the Trundle at the beginning of game number 2, especially before the game ended up devolving into this just back and forth, team fight stage, I think was really important. His early game pathing has gotten way better. He's been able to out-jungle a lot of the other really good junglers in the league. Marcoon is a very good jungler, and he just didn't have a lot of pressure in the early game in game number 2. Now, obviously, he redeemed himself quite a bit in the team fight stage of that game on the Viego, getting a lot of resets, but for Razork, it's just a really impressive streak that he's got going on. This is the kind of potential that we've always known that he's had as a jungler. It's just always been inconsistency with him. He would lose games incredibly hard, and those games, I think, would stick in our minds a lot more than the wins. I think he's been a lot better this split, and he deserves credit for that. Him and Humanoid, I still don't think have the best chemistry in the world, but Humanoid is talented enough to be able to make up for it with some good team fighting and just some aggressive positioning on things like the Tristana towards the back half of games. But Oscar Inen was the other player that I really wanted to give a big shout out to in this series. He was awesome, much better than Irrelevant. We'll talk about him. His game 2 was very bad, but finally got the chance to play some more aggressive picks, things like the Gangplank, things like the Rumble. He hasn't necessarily been given those kinds of keys on the main roster Fnatic team. That's why we thought he was getting called up over Wunder in the first place. I thought he was getting called up because he was more of that aggressive, carry-oriented style top laner. That's what he was for Fnatic Queso down in the ERLs, but he's been more of a tank player at the LEC level, which is fine. You've got a lot of other talent on this team that I understand you might want to play for, but he was given some more aggressive options in this series going into a more, I don't want to say tank-oriented weak side player, but that's kind of what Irrelevant has been over the course of his career, and Oscar, I think, definitely took advantage of that. Great game 2 from him. Really good game 1 on the Gangplank as well. Just a really solid player. This was, kind of a good split for him to kind of reassure people that he can be an LEC top laner. It was looking a little bit questionable, but the talent is definitely still there. If he can win lane a little bit more consistently, he's very good at translating leads into pressure around the map. It's just been a little bit of a struggle to consistently generate those leads against some of the better top laners in the league, but Irrelevant's a good player, and he was just better than him in this series. And then Noah and Trimby were also really good. Noah continues to never really put himself in all that much danger. I think that pairs up well with Trimby because Trimby is not afraid to die so that the team can generate advantages. Sometimes it was in a bad way in this game, and game 2 especially. A couple of those engages from Trimby on the Nautilus were just very questionable, but for the most part, he was relatively fine. I just think this series, when you're looking at the big positives, you're going to look at Razork and you're going to look at Oscar for me as the 2 big takeaways. And then for SK, unfortunate way for your split to end, but it's actually not all that bad. You have so many championship points because of how well you did, not only in winter, but just throughout the year up until this point, and so you're season is certainly not over. There's a very good chance that depending on what ends up happening with the other side of the bracket, you're going to be in the season finale anyways, and that's a pretty good thing to say, but I think they would have liked to be able to take down Fnatic and secure their spot into top 4 for the second time in 2023, just not able to do it, and it's not really all that surprising. I think we were all kind of coming out of the regular season seeing SK as maybe a good, not great team, and that's kind of what they showed, I would say. I think they honestly overperformed my expectations. I did not think that they were going to win a series. Even against a struggling Mad Lions team, I probably would have favored Mad Lions. That was certainly not the case for how it ended up turning out in the group stage. They were relevant, just not entirely good enough to be able to overcome, one of the better and more interesting teams in the league in Fnatic. But dud of the series for me is going to go to Irrelevant. In the top lane, just a really bad Sion game in game 2, was completely running it. I understand that sometimes you can get away with a little bit more of an aggressive style on Sion because dying isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world, but you got to make those plays worth it. Like, you got to do something with those deaths, and it didn't really feel like Irrelevant was doing that basically at all. He was giving so much gold over to the enemy team and just not really making it all that worth it. I think DOS also had a pretty poor game number 2 on the Recon. 1 or 2 really good engages that actually saved him from getting dud of the series here, but man, a couple of just really miserable plays. I think he stood out most in terms of the actively bad plays that SK was making, but everybody else on the team was actually relatively fine. Marcoon in particular, team fought really well on the Viego towards the back half of that game number 2, but Certus and Exakick I don't think made any sort of major errors. It was just kind of a little bit of a fiesta, and Fnatic is going to be better at that because they're a little bit more talented in terms of the mechanics when it comes to their players, and I think that definitely shined through. But again, like I said before, certainly not something to be mad about if you're SK. I think this result is going to be relatively positive for them overall, and again, depending on what ends up happening over on the other side of the bracket, this team is very likely to make season finale anyways and get a chance to play their way into the World Championships. I'm not necessarily sure that they should be expected to be able to do that. I still think that they have outperformed their talent level in comparison to a lot of the other LEC teams basically all year long, but players like Marcoon and Exakick I do really see as very high prio, very, very good players, and if they've been able to outperform those expectations, what's to say they can't do that again once they get into the season finale? But their summer split does end here a little bit, unfortunately. And then for Fnatic, they are moving on to that top 4. They still have to get the job done, though. They have not guaranteed anything because of how poorly they placed in the 2 previous splits. So as good as this performance is, the job is certainly not done for them now. And with the end of Group B, we now get to move on to the 2 series of Group A. And Group A is actually in a pretty similar position. I think these groups were balanced relatively interestingly in terms of qualification for the season finale. We've got 2 teams that are in a pretty decent spot to be able to qualify so long as they don't, lose out here. And one team that very much does need to get out of the group in order to qualify. And so all of these games do matter for these teams because they are all in contention. But we get to kick it off with a battle between the 2 teams that lost in round number 1, a matchup between the number 4 seeded Team Heretics and the number 8 seeded Koi, that Heretics is going to be able to take 2-0. This is huge for them. They are the team that does need to get out of this group in order to have any shot of qualifying for the season finale. They've had the worst performances of any team in this group across the previous splits, and so the way that they end up finishing this split is going to matter quite a bit, and they are probably the best team left in this group, or at least they should be in terms of regular season performance, and at least in this series, they did go out and prove that. They were definitely the better team between these 2. The first game did go 41 minutes, which is insane. It really shouldn't have. Heretics had full control of that game, and, there were just a couple of moments where players like Shigenda were trying to keep it alive, Larson was trying to keep it alive, but, for the most part, Heretics was definitely the better team across this entire series, and it was every player across the board really playing well. Player of the series for me is going to go to Flakked in the bot lane, but I think you could very realistically give this to Yankos in the jungle. I think you could give it to Evie in the top lane. Really good series from him. We'll get to those 2 in a second, but Flakked, in my opinion, has really been the best player on Heretics in the summer split. It felt like his emergence here and kind of him joining this team and really unlocking something for them in the bot lane is a big reason why this team ended up finishing so well in the regular season. People forget that he was so dominant in the first week of the regular season. I know that, week 1, it feels like so long ago in terms of, those performances, and these teams do feel like they've changed so much since then, but Flakked was dominating the league for the first week, and he was still really good over the other couple of weeks. He just wasn't quite as as dominant as he was at that point, but this was a really good series from him. He completely outplayed Comp on the other side of the map, and ADVN for that matter, in lane, out of lane, on the Xayah. Really, really good stuff from him. If he's going to be able to keep that up and genuinely be a top 380 carry in the LEC like he has been over the course of this split up until this point, this team is going to be pretty scary and pretty difficult to deal with. And you know, I think it's really impressive to see him play so well, so consistently here. I think a lot of people wrote him off after the G2 days because that bot lane was mostly just a weak side bot lane, and I think a lot of people, me included, blamed him in the bot lane for, you know, quite a bit of that, you know, for his inability to carry games, but clearly that is just not the case. He dominated the ERLs and absolutely earned a promotion back here to the LEC and has proven that that was not a fluke, that he's not just playing well at a lower level. He really is one of the more talented ADCs in Europe at the current moment, which is really fun to say. Jankos was really good. What a big surprise. He's been very good for this team. Both the Viego and the Trundle, I think, were really big positives for them. Going into a player like Malrang that obviously he's had a ton of experience playing into over the past couple of years, I think definitely helped. Jankos has always been relatively okay into Malrang so long as he doesn't lose early. That was a little bit of a problem in the finals last year, was that Malrang was just able to generate such massive leads in the early game that Jankos really wasn't able to recover. But this is a much different Malrang, a much different meta in general, and I don't think Malrang as a player has adapted all that well. We'll get to him in a bit, but Jankos doing a good job facilitating and honestly dealing a lot of damage in this series. You can look at his scoreline for that. He was actually doing a lot for this team, but Evie is the other player that you really got to shout out, having a really good series here. We've been very critical of Evie. I think, you know, obviously Reddit has been very critical of Evie. There have been quite a few analysts that have been very critical of Evie, and I think that for Heretics, if he's going to be able to step up and be more of what he was in the winter split, where I actually do think he was playing relatively well. Yes, he was basically a Cassante one trick at that point, but, you know, he was playing the map well. His macro game had certainly improved from what it was on DFM last year. I think if you're getting that version of him, the version of him that you got in this series, where he was grouping with the rest of his team, he was a big threat in team fights, doing well in lane, even in counter pick matchups, that's really like Heretics' big weakness as a team, in my opinion, is their inability to consistently, you know, survive a top lane matchup. I think Jankos and Vito have gotten along really well as a mid-jungle duo and been really proactive. Flacket and Mursa are great in lane, even though people love to hate on Mursa. I feel like, you know, when they're able to generate leads, he's one of the more, you know, interesting mid-game supports, I should say, in the league in terms of roaming around the map and being super aggressive out of the 2v2. That's something that just really hasn't been all that much of a priority for a lot of teams in the meta right now, but Mursa still does that, I think, at a pretty high level, even if Reddit, again, doesn't particularly like him. But I really do think that the top-end talent on this team is good enough to be a top 3, top 4 team in the league, and they proved that again in this series. Flacket and Jankos in particular, I think, playing well, and I think those two are really going to be the big difference makers for this team moving forward. And then for Koi on the other side, this does end their summer split. It does not, however, end their 2023. There definitely still is a world in which they can qualify, but a lot of their expectations are now on a couple of different teams. First of all, they would really like Heretics to not be able to get out of this group. They would really like BDS to be the team that does end up getting out of this group, which we will talk about in a bit, but also Excel is another team that, so long as they don't end up finishing in the top 2, would put Koi in a relatively good position. One thing worth noting that I didn't want to spoil, it technically was applicable when we talked about the previous series, but with Koi losing this series, SK Gaming has officially qualified for the season finale. They can no longer be overtaken by enough teams to be able to push them out, and so SK is going to be in the season finale. Again, didn't want to spoil that earlier just in case people hadn't seen the results of these series, but Koi is definitely leaving a lot up into the hands of other people now, and that's not really the situation that you want to be in towards the back half of a split. They've done enough to at least put themselves in the conversation throughout this year. Up until this point, obviously, getting top 3 in winter definitely helps that out quite a bit, but going 0-4 in the group stage is certainly not going to inspire a lot of confidence, even if they do end up getting to the season finale. My dead of the series was a pretty difficult decision because I really don't think anybody on Koi played particularly well, maybe with the exception, I should say, of Shigenda in the top lane, who I do actually think played relatively well, but my dead of the series is going to go to ADVN in the support position. He's just not been all that good for this Koi team. I like ADVN as a player, but I don't think he's great. I think at best he's a good support, and I think Comp has taken some major steps back in terms of being able to pressure in the early game, and it's really caused this 2v2 to not work out at all. They've pretty consistently been able to lose lane, and for Koi in particular, that's just not really something that they can recover from. This team relies so much on getting their bot lane ahead because Larsen's not really a player that's going to dominate the early to mid game, and so they're going to lose some pressure in the mid lane matchup. Malrang is just not having a very good split, and his early games have been significantly worse. He was definitely in contention for dead of the series, and Shigenda's a good player, but you certainly don't want to play through top lane in the LEC at the current moment if you're not able to win win out of other places on the map, or at least survive out of other places on the map. And so Comp and AdVN being such a negative on the map for Koi has been a big reason why this team, I think, has regressed so much from what they were in the previous parts of this split. But AdVN, I just don't think has been particularly a positive. Comp, like I said, has also just not been a positive. His damage and his team fighting output has also like gone down a significant amount. He was the best mid-game AD carry in the West last year by like a considerable margin. He was so dominant at taking leads that he was able to generate in the early game and blowing them out of proportion. And I think the big problem for him this split has just been his inability to consistently get those leads, and that continued in this series where Flakked was honestly just the much better player, and he has been the much better player over the course of this split. Malrang has not been good for this Koi team basically ever since the winter split where he was really good in the best of threes. It's really not been a great year for Malrang, and I think a lot of the flaws that we all kind of knew he had as a player have been exposed in this new meta. Again, I was really hoping to see kind of the narrative of that get pushed back on, because I really hate the idea that any player at this level is super meta dependent, but Malrang not necessarily, you know, busting those allegations, if you will. He's not been particularly good this year after the meta has changed from being able to just AFK, gank every single lane in the early game and forget about farming. You do need to be a little bit more clinical with your pathing, and I don't think Malrang has adapted as well as some of the other junglers have. Like I said, Shigenda was pretty good in this series. The Quinn pick in game number 1 was relatively fine. The team didn't know how to play around it basically at all, but he was fine individually, and I think the Gnar in game 2 was actually pretty good, but for Koi, like, you're just not going to be able to win if top lane is the only winning lane. Evie was actually pretty good in this series, and so you really weren't gaining that much of an advantage there anyways, and everybody else on the map was outclassed by their counterpart, which is definitely unfortunate. Like I said, Koi is not officially eliminated from anything at this point, but they're very, very close to being there. They just need a couple of things to go wrong, and they're going to be in a really bad position. But for Heretics, you absolutely needed this win to even keep your season alive, if you will, but it can't stop here. Very similar to what we said about Fnatic. It's all really about getting out of this group, and we're going to see if they're going to be able to get out of this group in this next series. And that's going to bring us to our final series of this video, and it's the final team that's going to be qualifying for the top 4 here. So we get another rematch of a round 1 matchup as we had Team BDS taking on Team Heretics. And Heretics are going to be able to take the 2-0 series win, and they're going to be moving on to the top 4. It really looked dicey for this team, but again, massive win for them. BDS didn't really need this one all that much. They had already qualified not only for the season finale, you know, which obviously is the main goal, but they'd qualified for the upper bracket of the season finale before this series ever kicked off, and so they didn't really need to win this series, but you always want some momentum, and so I'm sure that they were trying. But Heretics, the better team in this one, able to come out on top, and they looked really, really good in this series. Like we said in the previous one, they needed to be able to get out of this group to keep their season finale hopes alive, and this really sets up the most intriguing option. We'll talk about it in a bit, but basically everybody still needs to win in the top 4. This is the most intriguing top 4 that we could have gotten. Obviously, G2 being the exception. They've qualified for the upper bracket long time ago. They're a top 2 seed, guaranteed, but you know, for Heretics, they're right there with Fnatic and Excel as a team that really does need to do well, and they put themselves in a position to do so, but the story even after this is still not over for them. Let's talk about what they did in this series, though. Player of the series for me is going to go to VTO in the mid lane. Really awesome series for him. He's really just, like, perfected the Kai'Sa mid. He's been a massive proponent of that, and a lot of people have started picking it up, but really, I think a lot of people are going to associate Kai'Sa mid with VTO right now in major regions, and it's for a good reason. Really great game 1, but I don't want to, like, oversell this kind of performance, but this was kind of like a Chovy-level Ahri performance in game number 2. I always talk about him in particular as the player who, when he picks up Ahri as a champion, it feels like Charm is a point-and-click ability. It feels like he just never misses it. It's always on the correct target. There's really never any sort of doubt. That's how VTO was playing game number 2. It felt like he could not miss a charm to save his life, especially on Crowny on this Samira, and that just completely shuts down Samira as a champion. VTO doing a great job knowing exactly how he needs to win a series in a game like this and executing on it. VTO has been one of the best mid laners in the LEC. Basically, ever since he joined Misfits back in the day, he really struggled on Excel, and really just things in general on that team just weren't working out. He didn't have great chemistry with everybody, but getting back into a team where they can kind of facilitate him, not only just being a great secondary carry, but being someone that they can rely on to win lane very consistently and be a positive in late game team fights, has unlocked him into being very good again. I don't know if he's going to get back to that like MVP form, because remember, he's a former MVP. I know people forget about that, but he's a former MVP here in the LEC. If he can get back to that form, that's even better. But even the form he's at right now, which is just a top, 3-ish mid laner in the LEC, is still really, really good, and they're going to be very happy to have picked him up mid-season. If only someone on Twitter was talking about this move all year long, VTO to Heretics. If only there was someone. Link to Twitter's down in the description below. Go follow it. I have League of Legends takes. You're going to like them, but rest of this team was also really good. Evie in particular was fantastic again on the top side. Just a really good week from him. He's been really good in the best of 3 stage, and that's so positive for Heretics. This is a player that really did look like the weakness of the team moving into the best of 3, the group stage split, but he was really good in the group stage going up against Adam, who for most people's money is going to be a top 1 or 2 top laner in the LEC in 2023 in terms of performance. Evie was just better this series by a consistent margin. He was winning lane in game 1. He was really winning lane in game number 2 on the Renekton, and looking really good doing it. If he's going to be able to keep that up, if the solo laners are going to be massive positives after being kind of question marks going into the split, Heretics is going to be a team that can get better than top 4. Jankos, we know, is going to be consistent. He really did facilitate a lot of the plays Heretics made, even though I think he made a couple more mistakes than usual. Same thing for Flakked, a little bit over-aggressive, especially in that game 1 on the Xayah. I know you can get out of that situation, being Xayah, giving yourself self-peel, but you don't really ever want to be the player that, is a little bit too far forward. But Mersa, I thought, was phenomenal in this series. He's not going to get the credit he deserves because I think social media doesn't like him as a player, and they want to point to him as a weakness because they love Jankos, and they want to find anyone else to blame losses on, in situations like that. But Mersa was awesome in this series, and I really do think that he's a lot better than people give him credit for. He's a very good support. Maybe not like one of the best or anything, but certainly one that deserves to be in the LEC, and one that you can use and take into top 4 relatively cleanly like they are going to in this split. Overall for Heretics, it just looks a lot better than it did in week 1. We were very concerned after that first loss to BDS that maybe their regular season was just a little bit overhyped and that they were actually just kind of a middle tier team. Nope, they're actually able to dominate and take down BDS, and they're going to be moving on into the top 4 now. And then for BDS, obviously it sucks to lose a series. It's never going to be great to lose a series, but if you ever were going to lose a series, losing a series after you've already qualified for season finale, after you're already in the upper bracket, this really didn't matter all that much for them. They already knew exactly where they were going to be. Same thing for Mad Lions. Very similar conversation to be had of, yes, it sucks to lose the confidence of this, but these games don't matter nearly as much as the ones that are going to happen in a month. And so making sure that you're prepped for that, I think, is very, very important. The unfortunate part for BDS is it felt like they were really trying a lot in this series, and a lot of it just didn't end up working out. 2 games of Samira coming in for Crownie, a much more aggressive ADC. It did not work. He's going to get my dud of the series. It just felt like he was not necessarily playing up to his mechanical skill is really the way I'll put it. There could have been a lot more clinical play coming in from him. On Samira in particular, you really have to know your limits. You have to go in at the right time. You have to, you really time everything well. And Crownie just didn't feel super comfortable on the champion, if we're being honest. I'm not sure if that's something that they're going to continue to prioritize, but 2 games of it here, and I don't necessarily think it worked out. He, in my opinion, was the most noticeably bad, but Labrav, I don't think, had a particularly great series on the Nautilus. The bot lane in general, I just don't think was great. Mersa was the best player across both of these bot lanes in this series, and I definitely think that that is really not debatable, if I'm being entirely honest. And then Adam got run over in the top lane by Evie. A couple of aggressive picks, the Renekton, and then his signature Olaf. Just not necessarily working out, Adam's a pretty volatile player. He can have some good series. He can have some bad series. He's allowed to have games like this every once in a while, but losing to Evie wasn't exactly on my bingo card for what I expected in this series. Sheo and Nuke in the mid lane and jungle were relatively fine, but Jankos and VTO were both better, I would say, especially VTO, who was just so much more active and proactive on the map. Nuke didn't really make any sort of mistakes, but he certainly wasn't winning lane, and he certainly wasn't translating any sort of pressure into the rest of the map, and so you definitely got to give the edge to Heretics in that respect. But for BDS, it's okay. Like I said, losing the series really doesn't do anything for you, so you're not going to freak out too much. The one thing worth noting for BDS in this series that I haven't brought up, with their loss here, and more specifically with Heretics' win, it does set up a situation, which we'll talk about, where Vitality is now eliminated. Their season is officially over, with both Heretics and Fnatic and Excel all making, at the very least, top 3. It means that Vitality is going to be knocked out of top 6, so Vitality's season is done. That's going to be the end of the quote-unquote super team. I think a lot of people are going to be happy to hear that with the form that they're currently in. I don't think a lot of people wanted to see them in the season finale tournament. They wanted to see some teams that are a little bit more deserving in terms of what they've been able to put out, but with Heretics' win here, that is officially the case. But for BDS, not really going to freak out too much. They do need to get some of their shit together, if you will. Crownie and Labrav, I think, have been significantly worse in the summer split than they were at any any point before that, but if they can get back into the form, I still think top side of the map is very, very scary and can win any individual matchup, and this is definitely still a team that could be going to Worlds to represent Europe. But for Heretics, they want to join that conversation as well. We're going to, get to talking in the back half of this video about what happens and how they can make that happen, but for Heretics, really, really good performance overall from them here, and hopefully they're going to be able to keep it up. All right, but that is going to do it for my LEC Group Stage Week 2 overview and analysis video. Up on the screen now, we've got the 4 teams that are remaining in the LEC 2023 Summer Split. G2 and Excel obviously having qualified for winning their groups, immediately slotted into upper bracket. They still have their extra life available to them, but Fnatic and Heretics qualifying today, coming out of each group, immediately slotted into lower bracket, and so they've got to continue on. And really, this is the most intriguing combination, I think, of teams that we could have gotten for the season finale outcome. G2 obviously having already qualified, but Excel, Fnatic, Heretics, all of them want to continue moving on in this season, and all of them need to win to do it. Here are the scenarios that I'll just quickly lay out. First of all, the easiest one, the winner of Fnatic versus Heretics will qualify for the season finale. They will officially knock out Team Vitality. Whichever one ends up winning will make top 6. The other one will be out. So one of these two teams will be in the season finale, the other not so much. You've got to win. You've got to be able to get top 3 in order to get there. And then the other intriguing scenario is Excel. If they're able to get at the very least top 2, that means they need to win one series either against G2 in this upper bracket or against the winner of Fnatic and Heretics if they do end up losing. If they win either of those series, they make season finale. If they lose both of those series, if they do end up losing to G2 and then lose to the winner of Fnatic and Heretics, Koi will then make season finale. That's Koi's avenue to stay in the season finale races. They have to hope that Excel does not make top 2, because Fnatic and Heretics are guaranteed a spot just because of the way the championship points work. But Excel having so little, if they do end up getting top 2 and getting those amount of points, they will end up overtaking Koi and pushing them out. So 2 intriguing situations, 4 teams, seasons lives still on the line here is basically the most interesting outcome. That means 4 teams have officially qualified because only 2 of those 4 teams will make it. Those 4 teams, of course, being G2 and MAD, who have guaranteed top 2, and then BDS at 3 and SK Gaming at 4. It's not exactly in that order because obviously any of these teams could do really well and then push themselves up in terms of, championship points, but it is worth noting that those 4 teams are officially locked, and the last 2 will be one of Fnatic and Heretics and one of Excel and Koi. So really intriguing scenario, but I want to hear what you guys think is going to happen down in the comment section below. Who do you think is going to be winning the LEC Summer Playoffs? Who's taking G2 Excel? Who's taking Fnatic Heretics? Would love to know your thoughts down below. Of course, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like. It really does mean a lot to me. It lets me know you guys are enjoying the content, and it helps get this video out to a lot more people. Of course, if you're new here, hit the subscribe button. We post about every single LEC game on this channel, and with, playoff action basically rolling at the current moment, this is a great time to hit that sub button. We don't only cover the LEC, we cover all 4 of the major regions as well as the NACL, and playoffs are starting in basically all of them right now. And so if you want comprehensive coverage of all of the teams that have a potential to be going to the World Championships, this is the place for it. Hit the subscribe button and hit that bell so you can be notified when those videos go live. But of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day, and I will see you all later.